We have two speakers today. First one we have is Avert Robbie. He is the Prevention Education Program Director for Haven of Oakland County. As the director, he supervises a team of 3 prevention education specialists and continues to coordinate and facilitate community education, professional training, and school-based programs on sexual assault and intimate partner violence. Second speaker is Jasmine Valentine. Is that squeaking or is it just me? Or is it my voice squeaking? Don't repeat it, I'm sorry. Jasmine Valentine is the development manager of Haven for Oakland County. In this role, Jasmine specializes in cultivating donors relations, special events management, and external marketing communications for the agency. So please give a good round of applause. Jasmine Everett.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How is everyone doing? I normally don't like talking in mics, if that's okay. Can everybody hear me? Sweet. So as he mentioned, we are from Haven. Okay. Can you hear me now? I just get a little intimate with the mic. Haven is a nonprofit that is not too far away from here. We are closer to where the old Summit Place Mall used to be. Actually, this year we are celebrating 45 years of being in the community. We provide free, critical, and necessary services for survivors of intimate partner violence. Not a lot of people know us for our residential component, but we are a lot more than that. So. The entryway into Haven, no matter if you are seeking, emergency shelter or counseling, is through our 24-hour crisis line, and that's where people, not only are survivors contacting us, but it could be secondary survivors, so family members, friends, loved ones that have been impacted by this, to see, what resources are available in our community. We do have an emergency shelter where we have about 50 to 60 folks there most times, and that's where they get a bunch of different wraparound services. So not only do they have housing, which they're fleeing from somewhere and that is one of their critical needs, but they're receiving food, they have case managers to make sure what is this next step, because it is temporary housing. And with that, we are the only nonprofit in Oakland County exclusively for survivors. So a lot of times folks will call our crisis line because they are homeless or in need of shelter, especially we talk about the cold weather. But because we are specifically for sexual assault and domestic violence survivors, we have to refer them to our different community partners. And that reminds me, when we started in 1975, we were not the Haven that we are today. The organization started by a few volunteers seeing what the needs were in our community, and they actually partnered with St. Vincent de Paul, which is up the street, to have a crisis line, but specifically for domestic violence. But then they realized the intersection of domestic violence and sexual assault. Truthfully, you can't have one without the other, so they had to train the advocates and the volunteers to be able to talk about sexual assault and those components of what resources those folks need. So that's why now, when we moved into our 2016 building, we have everything is under one roof. We've identified that our clients face about 22 to 23 barriers. One huge one is transportation. So how are we empowering our community members to receive these services if they can't go from Royal Oak to Southfield because of transportation? So now our residential clients can see their counselor in the same building. They can see their court advocate, because as we all know, navigating our judicial system is really hard, especially if you are undergoing a traumatic situation right now. So we can help those folks right there at home. And then, as mentioned, Avery and his wonderful team, they are out in the community, not only informing our community members about these situations or this topic, such as this conversation now, but they're actually in the schools, which I think is amazing and something I learned today. When Haven started, the first program that we had was our prevention education program, because if you can't have those genuine conversations of what does this look like, how can we prevent this or risk reduction in our community, how can we actually help folks, because we know what's going on. So they are, and he'll probably talk more about this, but they are in a lot of different schools across Oakland County, literally from kindergarten all the way up to the collegiate level. So they're going in having those hard, difficult conversations with the little ones, which when I first joined Haven, I was a little worried of how do we have these conversations with such little kids without scaring them. And it's just as simple of, you own your own body. So being able to say, I don't want to give you a hug, I don't want to give you a handshake, of having that ownership rather than wait until most programs start in college, where we all know that as Americans, most Americans don't even go to college. So what about those marginalized communities that aren't getting that information? And another kudo to his department, just this past month, they are now in every classroom, every grade, and every school in Royal Oak School District. And that's the first school district that we're in there from kindergarten up to 12th grade.
How are we doing today? Good. It's a small group. It's very quiet. It's weird because when I run programming, I never like to stand up at a stage. I like to stand down with y'all, but in honor of this wonderful film and this microphone, I'm going to stand up here. But that does mean I'm going to ask you questions. Do you think y'all can handle that today? That was overwhelming. You hear that, Jasmine? So, like she said, what I'm here to talk about today, and what I'm excited to be here and talk about today, is intimate partner violence and sexual assault. And I go in, so I've been at Haven for almost 5 years now, and I'm always excited to go into community and have these conversations because largely, as a culture, we're not, right? We're not talking about it, we're not thinking about it, we don't want to look at it, right? We just kind of push it underneath the rug. We say things like, what happens in the home stays in the home, or what happens in a relationship is really none of my business. By show of hands, how many people in this room have ever heard something like that before or even said it? Right? And what I'll tell you is the more that we exist in that silence, that cultural belief that this has nothing to do with me, the more that this violence will continue, escalate, and get worse. Right? The Center for Disease Control actually considers this of epidemic proportions. Right? We do. If you look at research, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner at some point in their life. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. If we're talking about sexual assault, we're talking about 1 in 5 women and 1 in 33 men experiencing rape at some point in their life. Right? And what I know is that a lot of our statistics come from the criminal justice system. And that most survivors and clients that I work with, that Jasmine has worked with, will never actually disclose to law enforcement. And there's so many reasons why, right? But if we look at those statistics, is that a lot of people? Yeah, it's a ton of people, right? We've been talking, like you said, about the coronavirus, right? It's everywhere. I can't go anywhere without hearing somebody make a joke about it, a comment about it, or it being on NPR, which I listen to all the time. But my question for you is, if we look at this and we think about it, if 1 in 5 women and 1 in 33 men were contracting the coronavirus right here in the state of Michigan right now, what would you be doing? Really? You wouldn't be here, right? I wouldn't be here, Jasmine wouldn't be here, I'd be at home, right? Maybe we'd be having more conversations. The lack of toilet paper at Costco this weekend was astounding, right? There'd be no toilet paper at Costco, right? Purell would cost $80 million a pump. But when we talk about this conversation, what's important here is, do we react and respond to intimate partner violence and sexual assault in the same way? The answer is no, right? We're not. We're not freaking out about it. We're not having conversations about it. And most people in our community, with the exception of me, because it's what I do, aren't thinking about how do we end it, right? We're not thinking about prevention. We're not thinking about vaccination or how do we equip our culture and our community to respond. We're not doing it. And I have a problem with that, right? Part of what we're in today is Women's History Month, right? And I want to acknowledge that if we look at this violence in our community, it disproportionately impacts women. And it has for a really, really long time. And as a culture and as a community, we write it off in 5 billion ways. But one of the ways in which we write it off is being normal, right? That it's normal, it's just something that's happening every day like the weather. And we'll call it something called a women's issue, right? By a show of hands, how many people have ever considered or heard somebody say something like intimate partner violence and sexual assault are just women's issues for women to deal with? By a show of hands, right? And I'll tell you, as a man, the more that people say these conversations, the more I see men leave this room, right? My entire job hinges on a community response. And I think the more that we turn a blind eye to violence that impacts women and girls every single day, is the more that we see this violence continue, escalate, and get worse, right? I don't consider this a women's issue for a variety of reasons, right? But if we take a look at this, what I know is that this violence is impacting everyone in our community and our culture. It does impact men and boys, but it also impacts the women in our lives every single day. I even know that the vast majority of this violence is committed by men. Right? I do a presentation where I sit up here and I talk about the reality of violence in our community all day long. Right? 99.9% of convicted rapists in the U.S. are men.
Why are you looking at me?
No, I'm just looking at you. The weird reality is, if you look around this room, where are all the male-identified folks sitting? right? And I just want to acknowledge, right, if we have this conversation, that the best, y'all did it to yourselves, listen. But I think if you have this conversation, what's important here is if we look at violence in our community, it's overwhelmingly committed by men. Now, does that mean most men would commit violence? No. It's actually a very small percentage of men. But what I do know as a man is that I go to places of only men where things get said and done that wouldn't be said or done if women were present. And my job is to go out in community, specifically having conversations with men, and to say, in those spaces, we have a whole lot of power. Because what you say and what you don't say, and what you do and what you don't do, make a difference, right? And I personally believe that none of this violence that I work in, none of the clients that Haven serves, none of this epidemic will ever change until we have men working alongside women to eliminate violence in our community. And the important piece here is that no, it's not happening like the weather, right? It's not just something we get lucky at, but it's something that we can all make a difference in every single day. So I want to end my conversation with you today by highlighting what are those things that you can do on a day-to-day basis or on a semi-day-to-day basis to make that change. And the first and one of the most important things that we can talk about today is you can make a difference by how you show up for survivors and victims in our community. If you start that conversation off by believing, right? If you support that individual and say, I believe you, right? That we show up without judgment, right? We're not thinking to ourselves, well, why do they stay or why do they return to or how'd they get in that relationship in the first place? Because what I'll tell you is there's 5 billion ways that that plays out, right? That's a whole other training that I can do. If you're interested, call me. We'll talk about that in a second. But just showing up and not being judgmental, having compassion and empathy for people in our community and saying, I hear you, right? And what's happening isn't your fault, right? How can I best support you? We can make a difference by continuing these conversations, right? The fact that we're having this in our community is huge. Like I said earlier, a lot of people aren't thinking about it. So whether it's with your family, your friends, right, your community here at Sunday Assembly, your workplaces, right, but having these conversations about intimate partner violence and sexual assault, because regardless of whether or not you know it sitting in this room right now, I can guarantee us that every single person in this room knows multiple survivors in your life, right, every day. And I'll tell you, like Jasmine said, we're able to come out and have these conversations. So if you're hosting an event, if you're doing an art showcase, if you're with another space, your children's schools, or you're in your own workplace, we can come out and have that conversation with you. You can screen one of the many documentaries about the topics that we work in, and we'd be happy to support you in that too, right? It's even in how we donate our time and our energy, right? So Jasmine, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sweet. So talking about myths, one thing that I always start off when we talk about the financial aspect of Haven. A lot of people think that nonprofits are funded by the government. If anyone ever told you that, that is a complete lie. Working in development, I've been at Haven about 18 months, and I remember when I first came in, the ratio was, we had as fundraisers, I call my team very small, but very mighty. There are 4 of us. When I first started 18 months ago, we were in charge of raising about 45% of our operating revenue. Since that time, it has completely flopped. So now, my team, we are responsible for 55% of our operating revenue, and we receive about 45% from the government. They pick and choose what they want to fund. It is extremely hard to be awarded federal grants just because they're looking for very specific programming, results, which I don't really know results what they're looking for, but we try. And with that, even for AVERT's program, it is completely funded by public donors. So whether that is the Detroit Lions, that if it wasn't for them, we probably wouldn't be able to have that program, and folks like you. So my small but very mighty team, again, there are 4 of us, we are responsible for raising about $2 million a year to fund the different programs. Because as I mentioned earlier, our survivors, we never ask them to pay a single dime. We don't do a sliding scale, we don't ask for a debit card, we don't ask for insurance, because we know most of these folks wouldn't be able to afford these services if we did charge something. So that's where we bring in our community. If you wanted to do a donation drive of, hey, me and my book club, we want to donate pajamas, books, and cereal to residential, like that even helps us a lot. If you're like, you know what, I want to do collect funds for Denim Day, which is April 29th, which actually started by a Supreme Court case where it's awful, I always get really frustrated when I think about this. The case was overruled because they ruled that her jeans were too tight and she must have needed help. She must have helped the abuser take her pants off. what? Just because their jeans were too tight? So now we have this denim day where people can bring funds together and help out these different organizations that combat these issues. So if you're interested in any way of any creative idea that you might have to help us, again, that could be a donation drive, that could be a can drive, anything you could think of, it would really help us. Because we help about 30,000 individuals a year. And as Haven mentioned, a lot of folks are like, I don't personally know a survivor. I don't know that this issue is, is at this huge epidemic rate, but let us tell you it really is. You might not know someone outward that is impacted by these issues, but once you start having those conversations, going into those spaces, you would be surprised who's actually impacted by this. So if you have any questions about how you want to engage with Haven, whether that is volunteering with the youth at Haven, whether that is helping us with administrative work, attending any of our events, let us know. We have some of our information in the back, and we will be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.